Facebook Live technical glitch, and so we're just about a minute late. My name is Gerry Friesen, also known as a recovering farmer. I am a stress and conflict management specialist working out of Manitoba. Because of my own journey with mental illness, I have a real passion in talking about it because it is in talking to others we can find a path forward for ourselves. You can learn more about me by visiting gerryfriesen.ca. Through this Facebook Live event, I am representing the Stigma-Free Society, which is a Canadian registered charity that aims to reduce stigma of all kinds with a focus on mental health. This event is a part of their Rural Mental Wellness Toolkit, an online community-based mental health program that creates access to mental health education and peer support training, as well as practical and relatable resources for those living in rural and agricultural communities. You can find the toolkit at ruralmentalwellness.com. I am excited today to have the opportunity to chat with Miranda Leybourne. Hi, Miranda.
Hi, Gerry. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's great that you were able to come on. Before we jump into some questions and a conversation with Miranda, I'm going to give you a quick introduction to her. Miranda is a writer and journalist living in Neepawa, Manitoba. Originally from Kirkland Lake, Ontario, she grew up in many small towns in Canada and the United States due to her father's work in the gold mining industry. A mother of two, Miranda was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder when she was 16 years old and co-occurring depression in her early 20s. She was diagnosed with OCD, which she's had since she was a child, after a particularly challenging episode of postpartum depression after her daughter was born. Now she's passionate about sharing with others, particularly mothers, children, and teens, about what has helped her live a happy, joyful life in spite of her mental health challenges. Sounds exciting, Miranda, and I'm looking forward again to this conversation. Perhaps you can begin by telling us what it was like to grow up in rural communities throughout Canada and the US.
Absolutely. You know, I think it was really, really cool for me to see so much of North America at a really, really young age. And also to see so much of, for lack of a better term, blue collar communities. That's a really core part of my identity and my family's identity. So there's a lot of pride in being from a gold mining family and from gold mining communities. And but certainly just the nature of gold mining, not all mines have the biggest deposits of gold, and so we did have to move around. We were lucky because my father, he worked really, really hard, and he made his way up through the industry, and he would eventually become like mill supervisor, so he would be in charge of the process of melting down the gold. And so through that we were able to live in different places. One of the ones that I liked the most was when we lived in Montana, northern Montana, just right below Alberta. We lived very close to this town called oh, now I'm blanking on it. Oh gosh, Gardner, Montana. And I can just remember like living on the mountain outside of the town and driving down on the school bus every day to go to school. But there were certainly challenges living in isolated, rural, often northern communities. Of course, it can be challenging living in southern rural communities, but even more so, like where I went to high school and from grade 6 to the time when I graduated high school, I lived in Snow Lake, Manitoba, which is about 8 hours north of Winnipeg, I think, if I can remember correctly. And it was a beautiful place. And we always joked around that the biggest thing you had to worry about was bears in your yard. You didn't really have to worry about crime or anything. But one of the biggest challenges was for me when my mental health issues started. Not for any lack of trying on my parents' part or the doctor's part or the school's part, but it's just really hard to get resources when you're isolated and northern. So um, luckily, I had a lot of people in my corner who kind of made things work anyway, but I think not everyone can be so lucky when they're living rural and northern.
Yeah, and you know what,
Mhm.
you make an interesting point, because I think in the agricultural community we often talk about farmers being somewhat isolated, and yet when you talk about Snow Lake, that adds
Mhm.
a whole new definition to isolation, I suspect. So,
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit about those resources you did actually find?
Absolutely. So, I remember when, well, like you said in my intro, like looking back now, I can see that I had OCD, anxiety, even depression at quite a young age. Now, some of that was trauma related from some things that happened, in my childhood. And some of it is intergenerational trauma, which I'm, only just beginning to learn about now, which is really fascinating. But what happened with me was my anxiety disorder kind of really set in when I was about 16 years old. And I can see now that it didn't, but it really felt at the time that someone like had flipped a switch, and it just came out of nowhere. And suddenly I was having terrifying, intrusive thoughts, daily panic attacks that truly felt like the world was ending. Like
Yeah,
it was so scary. And I went along with that. And of course, I was the kind of person, I shared everything with my parents. So I told them all about it, and they didn't know what to make of it. They had never, I learned later that my mom had experienced many of these things, but I guess there wasn't as much information back then. Anyway, so they took me to the doctor. I remember my dad, he wrote me a little note one morning and he said, "Everything is going to be okay. You'll see." And I still have that note now. And I keep it in a special little jewelry box he bought me. But he took me to see the doctor. And I told the doctor, like, I'm worried that I'm going crazy. I was like 16 at the time. And he said, "You're not going crazy. You have anxiety disorder." And that was a huge weight off of our shoulders. But unfortunately, it would be probably several months, maybe half a year until I got any real relief from it, because they hooked me up with a counselor who came up, I think, once every 4 months to the community. And, I told this counselor, I said, "I read an article in this teen magazine about OCD. I'm pretty sure I have that." And she said, "Oh, no, you just have anxiety." And she tried as best she could, but only seeing me every 4 months, I just continued to decline, and that was the first time that I had experienced, I would say moderate depression. I remember, what looking back on one picture that was taken of me on my mom's birthday, and I remember I just felt so, like, depressed, not just anxiety. Now the depression had kicked in, and I can look at that picture now and see it in my eyes, and so, yeah, thankfully, my mom was working as a healthcare aide. And so she was over at a client's house one night, staying awake while they were sleeping, and she was watching TV, and an infomercial came on. This was back in, would have been the early 2000s, because I graduated in 2004. And it was all about this anxiety program, and it was quite expensive. It was a cassette and workbook program, but I was really lucky. My parents bought me that program. And at its core, it was just CBT that you go through on your own. And I really feel like that moment kind of saved my life, because I was going through so much inner turmoil. And I can remember the day the program came, I listened to the first tape, and it was like something clicked. And it certainly wasn't the end of my journey with anxiety, but very, very quickly, my panic attacks stopped, because they taught me 5 CBT tools on how to stop them. And I started to, gain back my life. There would be more steps along the journey, but so for me, you know, I could have been helped sooner perhaps if I hadn't lived rural, but I think the kind of the stars aligned for me, and just having the support of my parents was
yeah.
huge. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And you
Mhm.
know, I found it interesting at the outset. You said that looking back now, you're learning a lot of the stuff about stuff that you experienced, and it's
Mhm.
somewhat fascinating. And I think a lot of people, and I experience this myself, you get into this mental illness and you feel hopeless and you're not sure
Mhm.
you can ever come out of it. And then you
Mhm.
do learn things just like you did with that first cassette,
Mhm.
and you start moving forward, and then you actually get to a point where you can look back and actually learn more about what you're experiencing and learn more about what others are experiencing, and to really
Mhm.
gain an understanding of what you're experiencing.
Absolutely. I kind of think of when you're in the midst of a mental illness, it's like wearing special glasses that make everything dark and hopeless and cold. And you know, even now, I have tools that I use. I call them like relapses. So you know, I live pretty healthy, happy life, but there have been times when I've kind of, whether it's to do with outside pressure or health or whatever, for a couple weeks I dip back into like an unhealthy state. And those times are really a struggle, but I feel like now that I've been through so much, that I've talked to other people, it's easier now, but I totally relate with what you feel. And I think people who haven't experienced mental illness, as much as they want to, like my husband, as much as he wants to understand, he's supportive, but he can never truly understand how painful that is. It's painful emotionally and then physically, especially with the depression. Like I always felt like a heaviness on my chest, like a pain, you know. So the thing is that you have to remember is that there's always going to be a time when this lifts, and that what's really helped me with that is meditation, mindfulness, and just realizing that nothing is permanent, yeah, and that's huge. And what I tell myself if I go through a period of mild depression now, is, you know what? I've had this before and I've gotten through it before and I'm so much more better educated. So here's my plan. I'm going to focus on getting more sleep. I'm going to make sure I'm outside exercising. I'm going to kind of ease up on what I put on myself. And then the other part of that is, what can I do now to make myself feel better? Like, am I going to go shopping? And, it's not to say that shopping, like things like that, are a cure for depression, but we tend to kind of look after everyone but ourselves. And when we're going through a tough time, there's nothing wrong with, you know, treating ourselves and doing little things, even if others might think they're silly, like grabbing your favorite snack or something. Like we need these things, these small things to get us through the big moments.
Yep, exactly.
Mm.
And I discovered something new this week, and this last couple of weeks, and I had fought against this with my wife for so long, and she wanted to go camping, and I said I
Mhm.
wanted no part of it. We used to camp, and there's a long story there, but I finally consented 2 weeks ago to go camping,
Mhm.
and I came home and I found myself to be in a better headspace than I had been in a long time. So sometimes we don't even know what the things are that can really help us, but then we
Mhm.
try different things, and we're surprised at the end of the day that there is hope and there is relief.
Exactly. And sometimes it's as much as a change of scenery, which is actually really intimidating if you're in an anxious episode or a depressive episode or whatever the case may be. For me, I just want to like stay home. I get a little agoraphobic where even going for a walk an extra block feels unsafe. So, what I've noticed is I want to be prepared in advance. So the first ever therapist that I talked to, after the counselor that I talked to when I was a teen, was when I was having pretty severe postpartum depression. It was late onset. My daughter was already one. I worked with this amazing therapist. I got my OCD diagnosis, and he said, "You know what? I don't know much about OCD, but I'm going to work with you through this." And he was a community mental health worker. So, I went through that way, didn't have to pay. And he told me I have to have a toolkit of things that I can call on when things are tough. So things that I practice when, every day when things are good, but then a toolkit that I can kind of rely on. And so I think that's so important. That's what I tell everyone, build your toolkit, and that's going to be different for everybody. But you need to build your toolkit, and then it's always going to be there for you.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Sorry, I'm jotting that down. I like
No
that.
problem.
Uh, so Miranda, part of course, this is for the Stigma-Free Society and
Mhm.
their rural mental wellness toolkit. You started experiencing some of your mental illness at a younger age. You've
Mhm.
lived all over North America, so to speak. I'm curious, and no, sorry, and I should also say that your parents, when you talked to them about this at the outset, they were
Mhm.
very understanding and
Mhm.
did want to help you. But I'm curious what you've seen out there as far as a stigma goes,
Mhm.
um, as the stigma about mental illness and people not wanting to talk. Can you talk about that a wee bit?
Yes, and you know what? This is something that makes me so happy because, I'm 35 now, and I compare when I first started experiencing mental illness, there was no way that I would tell anyone in school. One of the challenges of being in a rural community was that it's in the north is that it's very clicky. So already I was experiencing a bit of bullying. So I certainly never wanted to talk about it with anyone. I didn't tell anyone other than my parents, and slowly it was really through, mom and baby groups that, people started talking about their mental health through, postpartum issues, and I remember one mom saying to me, like, "I cannot believe you've had this too, you're so cheerful, that makes me feel better." And I thought, "Wow, like, I have to start talking about this more, especially because I have young kids now, and thank goodness, they're not experiencing some of the same things I experienced as a child, but, you know, I want to be always open with my mental health if I can help anyone, and what I'm noticing, even in rural communities, I live in Nipawa, it's a small, I think maybe we have 5,000 people now, but don't quote me because 'cause we're growing so quickly, but my daughter's in middle school, and the schools are really taking mental health seriously for the younger generation. My son's school, Hazel M. Kellington here in Nipawa, they have just so many wonderful mindfulness topics that they talk to the kids about. They have this thing called the Count's Corner where the vice principal dresses up as a Count Dracula. And in every newsletter, there's tips for parents to talk to their kids about mental health. I think, and no one is happy about the COVID-19 pandemic, and I think mental health went down, but a lot more people were made aware of mental health. A lot more people started talking about it. I had friends who have never had anxiety come to me and say, "Now I know what you've been through, and now I'm having anxiety." And I've been able to help them. And that's a hugely wonderful feeling. And so when it comes to stigma, I think with every year that passes, with more and more people talking about mental health, even in rural places, the stigma's going down. And I think it's just one of the good changes in society that we're seeing. There's still a ways to go because a lot of people can say, I've got anxiety, I've got depression. There's still a lot of stigma for things like schizophrenia or, the more quote unquote serious mental illnesses. Not to say, I mean, OCD can be torturous, but it almost seems like there's like more trendy mental illnesses to have. But so I think we just have to keep talking, always have that open conversation, and, not be afraid to share our stories.
Yeah, exactly. And I
Mhm.
appreciate the fact that you're sharing yours, Miranda, because
Mhm.
as I've said often enough over the last 12 years since I started sharing mine, it's when we share stories, when we talk to each other, we learn, right? And we help each
Mhm.
other. And that's a good way for all of us to move forward.
Absolutely, and as a mother, I'm trying to teach my kids these skills. Thankfully, they are learning some of them in school. I still think schools could have, like, a whole subject on, good mental health skills. Hopefully, one day that happens, but, I try to get them meditating. I have an app called Calm, and it has sleep stories, meditations, and I'm teaching my kids to meditate through that. Every night before bed, they say 3 things they're grateful for, 3 reasons they're proud of themselves, 3 things they're looking forward to. And, my kids experienced anxiety during the
Yeah.
COVID-19 pandemic,
Yeah.
and I think we just have to realize that it's a part of life. No one's immune. Hopefully, it won't cross over into a diagnosable mental illness, but you know what? These are things that are just common in human nature. So we don't need to make big deal of them.
Yeah, and I like what you said about the fact that, well, I don't know if like is the right word, but
Mm.
if there's something we learned going through COVID, it is the
Mhm.
fact that a lot of people are experiencing isolation. A lot of people are experiencing that fear that's out there.
Mhm.
Um, but what it has done is built an understanding as well, and I think that in itself can be helpful as we move, hopefully, out of COVID.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's more compassion and more empathy for people. And I know for a lot of people, COVID-19 exacerbated their fears or their disorders. For me, for having OCD, and you're already prone to obsessive thoughts, I certainly had a lot of worry about my kids getting COVID or my parents getting COVID or even me getting COVID, not so much that I'm worried about what will happen to me, but, as a mom, I'm like, "Oh, what if I get sick? What if I end up in the hospital?" My husband's amazing, but no one can replace a mom, so what are my kids gonna do? Um, and it was a real I kinda try to look at it as a real practice opportunity to just get even better with my mental health skills, but, I hope to see more and more funding from provincial governments, federal, municipal, going towards mental health. I know there's people are already talking about elections, and I never talk about my politics, but I really hope to see, all levels of government really, really putting more resources into mental health.
All right, I'm going to change gears here a wee bit, Miranda. And I know you've shared about your experience in living in different mining towns, for example.
Mhm,
But now you're into journalism.
mhm,
Currently, you're a reporter for the Brandon Sun, if I
mhm.
can say that out loud.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
you've also worked at a, dare I say, rural radio station when you worked out
Mhm,
of Dauphin, Manitoba. As part of that, you clearly talk to a lot of rural and agricultural
mhm.
communities, to people. Can you talk a little bit about what your observations have been regarding the mental wellness of our rural and agricultural communities?
Well, I think the trend that we're seeing is that even in these communities, it's becoming more and more acceptable to speak out about mental health. The challenge, I think, is that farmers tend to be fiercely, fiercely independent and self-reliant people. I don't want to paint them all with the same brush, but I've been fortunate enough to know a lot of producers, and they take care of everyone else, be it their family, their community, their animals, their crops, and then if they have time and energy left, they take care of themselves. And you and I met through what you're doing with farmer wellness, and to me, that is so inspirational because we just cannot talk about it enough and we cannot get out the message there enough. Like, I do see a shift starting to happen where people are talking more about everything that affects their mental health. But I think it is hard anytime you come up with personalities that, and maybe they were taught, we don't talk about these things, or, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I think that's really, really outdated. And of course, it probably served people well with things not to do with mental health. Like, oh, I'm really, really tired, but, I've got to do all this plowing today. You know what? I just got to be tough. I got to grit my teeth and get through it. But with mental health, the solution isn't closing in on yourself and kind of not talking to people and wishing it away. The solution is reaching out, forming a community. The more people that talk about it, the more that their friends and neighbors feel they can talk about it, and that's only going to benefit everybody in the community. And
Yeah.
I do see with the work that you're doing, Gerry, that this is coming up and this is becoming more and more of a reality, and that makes me thrilled because the farmers are the heart of our country. If it weren't for them, no other facet of society could work. So we have to hope that, they're being well taken care of physically, mentally, just every part of their lives. We depend on them so much.
Absolutely. And we made the farmers make up less than 2% of our population, and yet, like you say, they're the backbone. They're the ones that feed us, and so that community is incredibly important to us, and whatever we can do to help there is awesome. And
Mhm.
when you talk about it, when others talk about their own personal experiences, that's helpful. um, I mean, I started talking about my story back in 2010, and there wasn't a lot of uptake on it because that was completely bizarre that someone would actually talk publicly about it. But over the course of the last number of years, there's been a whole lot more awareness built through organizations such as Do More Ag. I know it's come to the attention of provincial and federal governments, and so I hope you're right. Let's not talk about politics, but let's
Mhm.
talk about what hopefully future governments can do in this field, because we need to do more,
Mhm.
and we are doing more. So that's really good to see.
Definitely. And I agree with you. Grassroots organizations like yours are doing incredible things, but the government has to see that and has to kind of match that effort. And so we do need to see more from all levels of government.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I just, and sometimes I like to see something humorous, and I saw something on social media this morning where someone had done a TikTok video about a doctor, and he finds out that a farmer has come to see him,
Mhm.
and how he approaches things completely different. Talks about, well, what pain scale, what his pain on the pain scale, what's he's experiencing, and he's told, well, farmers don't have pain scales, right? They just either it doesn't hurt or it hurts, but whatever the case, they have to work. And so in a
Mhm.
way, it really gave a true perception of how often, and I did the same thing. You go to the doctor's office and you sit there and you have to wait for a while, and eventually, in my case, I lost patience in waiting and I left, which
Mhm.
which I shouldn't have done. But that's kind of that farmer community mentality that
Mhm.
we experience.
Right, and I think, there's a lot to be celebrated about the resilience of the ag community. If we can just move that in the direction of reaching out, that resilience is going to serve this group of people well, and I think they would have, no one wants to put a time limit on recovery, but I think that that would be the backbone of their recovery is their resilience, their determination. You cannot fail with that kind of qualities
Yeah.
going at it?
Yeah, for
Mhm.
sure. And what this happens every time I talk to people, we're basically reached the end of our half hour. It goes by quick, and I know we
Mhm.
could have a much longer conversation. But Miranda, can you perhaps kind of summarize? And you did talk about this a wee bit, but why is it important for you to share your story and unique experiences?
Well, I think that even if I reach just one person, let's say it's a mother struggling postpartum or it's a teenager faced with a diagnosis of anxiety, panic, depression, then none of my struggle was in vain. And then, in fact, I'm very grateful that I had this struggle because, life is what we put out into the world and it's all about who we can affect. And we just have to hope we can make good change in this world. So I don't think that I'm going to do anything great, but even if I can just help one person understand that there is hope and mental illness is not going to be the thing that is going to take over their life, then I will be happy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And you used the words before, and you had done this for yourself, is build a toolkit.
Mhm.
That's what we do over at Stigma-Free Society. Is we're working on that rural mental wellness toolkit, which all our listeners, watchers today, if you're interested in this information, if you want to share this interview with others, please visit www.ruralmentalwellness.com. It's there, and go there for other resources which certainly can help you build your toolkit. Thank you, Miranda, for joining us today. Your insights into mental health and wellness certainly have resonated with me, as I'm sure they have with our audience. The key message here is, and you said it, and I've said it before, Miranda, is there's no shame in not being okay. There's no shame in reaching out for help. And hopefully our conversation today has given someone that extra encouragement they need to reach out. So again, please visit www.ruralmentalwellness.com. And so thanks again, Miranda. And until next time, stay safe and stay well.
Thank you.